Hello everyone, and welcome to another Flat Earth video. This is John the Morgile checking in with you for January 20th, 2019. So, getting right into it, the arguments for the hypothetical spinning ball Earth are a house of cards precariously teetering on the proverbial fulcrum of institutionalized mind control and a litany of assumptions which must be completely taken for granted without question in spite of endless evidence against a spinning ball Earth. The world naturally presents itself to us plainly and unambiguously. It is in fact at rest and therefore presents itself to us with zero evidence to suggest that it is in motion. Certainly not curvilinear motion spinning around an axis while traveling along multiple conflicting so-called orbital paths. It is indeed self-evident that the world is a potentially unlimited plane. In turn, the world itself does not present itself with evidence to imply that it is spherical in any way, shape, or form. On the other hand, we in the Western world have been systematically conditioned to build our entire paradigm upon the steadfast, unquestionable belief in the patently absurd theory that the world is a ball spinning at over 1,000 miles an hour at the equator, traveling along multiple curvilinear trajectories simultaneously. It is not the Earth that is deceptive or ambiguous about its true nature, but it is instead people who have confused ourselves. Standard history purports that everyone knew the Earth was a spinning ball way back in even the 3rd century BC when Eratosthenes came up with his now famous or infamous, depending on how you look at it, experiment, which was intended to calculate the circumference of the hypothetically spherical Earth. Eratosthenes' value, as it's called, is derived by first assuming the Earth is a sphere, assuming the Sun is positioned at essentially an infinite distance, wherein the light rays from the Sun are assumed to strike the Earth parallel to one another. And it is, in fact, according to this theory, the Earth that is curving beneath parallel light waves. Now, this particular point is one of contention, as it wasn't until the end of the 15th century that the oldest surviving miniature globe Earth toy, dubbed Eratosthenes, was constructed by Martin Behaim in 1492. This year is of course noteworthy, as it is during this very year that Spanish explorer Cristobal Colon, aka Christopher Columbus, quote-unquote discovered the American continent. So the question is, why, if the entire world knew the Earth was a spinning ball, did it take science over a millennia and a half to finally get around to constructing a scaled-down model of the hypothetical globe Earth? Furthermore, Columbus apparently disagreed with Eratosthenes' value of the Earth's spherical dimensions, believing the distance from the Canary Islands where he left to Japan, where he thought he was going, heading west over the Atlantic of course, he figured that distance to be about 6,600 miles, where in reality, and yes, according to Eratosthenes' value, the distance is almost double that at 12,000 miles. This major discrepancy in reality and world maps available to Columbus at the time is absolute proof that you can have maps that work for navigational purposes even though the overall world model is absolutely incorrect. This point is important as globe earthers believe that the fact that the globe model or even flat Mercator projection maps prove the Earth is a sphere, as said maps couldn't possibly work upon a flat Earth. That's right, globeheads indeed proclaim that the Mercator projection is exclusive to a sphere because it allegedly begins with the assumption that the Earth is a sphere, thus it proves the world is a sphere because it simply works. The problem with this entire argument is the main premise, which is to assume for argument's sake that a projection based on the assumption of a given latitude and longitude system, which are ultimately derived from astronomical observations, are somehow exclusive to a spherical Earth, which they are not. Flat Earth proponents for the AE projection have long received flack for the apparent discrepancies between real-world distances between far southern points and the apparent depicted distances upon the AE projection. The ironic portion of this so-called argument for the globe is the fact that the Mercator projection, in all of its glory, contains eerily similar perceived faults in the very matrix of the map. Much like the AE projection, or the azimuthal equidistant projection, the Mercator projection depicts latitude lines in gross discrepancy to actual distances between especially far southern points. For one example, the 90° south latitude is depicted upon the Mercator projection as a line of equal length to that describing the equator. So the 90° south latitude, which according to the ball Earth is a single point on the very bottom of the hypothetical sphere, this point is represented on the blessed and omnipotent Mercator projection as a 25,000-mile mammoth of a latitude line, just like the equator. In this respect, if you misunderstand the purpose of the map and misapply an ignorant and misled process of reviewing the map, then you will likely arrive at conclusions that are void of any real meaning. Similarly, globeheads who review the AE projection from a position of ignorance will find discrepancies in real-world distances between far southern points and those depicted on the AE projection, and proclaim said potentially perceived discrepancies, as there is a conflicting information to be found about the real-world distances. These discrepancies are allegedly proof negative against the flat Earth, yet they will ignore the exact same flavor of discrepancy when it comes to the globe Earth theory and the accompanying Mercator projection. This is tiringly typical of the globe Earth side of the argument, to hold proponents of flat Earth to impossible standards, yet they will completely disregard and ignore such standards the instant they lend themselves negatively to the ball Earth theory. Some other obvious examples of such blatant ignorance coupled with arrogance on the globe Earth side of the argument include the notion that circumnavigation only works on a sphere. Also, what goes up must come down is somehow exclusive to, let alone possible upon a spinning ball Earth. And let's not forget about the counter-rotation of cyclonic forces north or south of the seasonal path of the Sun, somehow being exclusive to a sphere Earth via the Coriolis force, which is a real force but is certainly not applying itself to the stationary plane Earth. The phases of the Moon, of course, somehow prove the Earth is a sphere too, which is completely lost upon me, along with the assumption that, quote, because the Moon and Sun appear to be spherical, the Earth therefore must also be spherical. This sort of assumption of exclusivity can be found all throughout the so-called arguments for the spherical Earth. You can also lump the wandering stars, also known as the planets, into this category, which is tantamount to stating that cue balls are spherical, therefore pool tables are necessarily spherical too. Along this same line of illogical thinking, that the tides also prove the Earth is a sphere. The fact that the Earth has wind proves that it is a sphere, although never 1,000-mile-an-hour wind at the equator, of course. Tectonic plate movement is often claimed to be exclusive to the spinning ball Earth, as are the very seasons we experience every year. Not to forget eclipses, both solar and lunar, prove the Earth is a sphere. And finally, the misconception of ships over the horizon, as observed by Christopher Columbus, must also prove the Earth is a sphere too. And that's a very important one because it is brought up almost all the time by globe Earthers. So running through each of these individually. So as you can see here on the AE or azimuthal equidistant projection, you have distances between, say, the southern tip of Australia to the southern tip of Africa, or the southern tip of South America. The distances there are purportedly about 22,000 nautical miles in between the three. It's 8,000 from here to here, 8,000 from here to here, and 6,000 from here to here. Although that is contested upon the globe because, of course, the southern latitude line should be much smaller rings than the equator. And, of course, when you convert the nautical miles on those figures to statute miles, you get a result that is, way too wide around to be consistent with any sort of ball Earth. So globe Earthers will proclaim the fact that the distance around the far southern points does not jive with real distances, which remains to be seen. Although, if you read this map correctly, you'll note that it is an azimuthal equidistant projection, so it only works for distances going south from the center point. So if you're traveling east to west along, say, this longitude line, it is not representing an actual distance, again, because I believe that the AE projection first assumes a spherical Earth, converts that to Mercator projection, and then converts the Mercator projection to a flat map. So I think that there's issues with that, although until we do full-scale geodetic surveying in the far south and along the oceans of the far south, which will probably never happen, we really don't have a good idea of what's going on in terms of the overall map. I'm a firm believer that there may be additional continents even in the known world circle area if you humor the AE projection. And of course, I also believe that there are other continents and land masses outside of our little circular AE projection that you see here. Maybe that's the case, maybe it isn't, but to say that the distance from here to here is far too long for reality, because flights are made between these two locations all the time, and the time that it takes those flights is not consistent with this sort of map. You must remember that the map, much as the Mercator projection does, the further south you get of the equator, the more and more skewed the distances between continents become. So the relative sizes of continents and distances between continents becomes increasingly skewed as you travel south of the center point. So the east to west indications on this particular map are necessarily, by default, according to the very nature of the map, skewed and stretched. And so again, by claiming that the AE projection doesn't accurately represent distances between far southern points, therefore it is null and void, is tantamount to saying the exact same sentence about the Mercator projection. So the only difference between the Mercator projection and that would be you could say that any latitude line far north or far south of the equator is necessarily going to be skewed from reality. And again, at its most obscene, the 90 degrees north or 90 degrees south latitude, which are allegedly a single point, are stretched to infinity and represented by a line of longitude that is exactly the same distance across as the equator, which represents 25,000 miles. So, you can't have your cake and eat it too. You can't say the Earth isn't flat because the AE projection potentially misrepresents far southern distances, going east to west at least, wherein you completely ignore that same rule or that same standard when it comes to the Mercator projection. So again, if you misunderstand and misapply the rules of a given map, then you're going to end up with a result that is void of any meaning. Now, the next so-called proof of a spherical Earth is, of course, circumnavigation, which is claimed to be exclusive to a spherical Earth. But really, when you circumnavigate the world, let's say east to west, because it certainly doesn't happen very often, like allegedly once or twice ever when it comes to north to south, although east to west circumnavigation happens millions of times a year. And, of course, this is because, according to the AE projection, you have a central North Pole where magnets are always attracted to the center of the world for whatever reason. You can get into theories about that, but we do know that the Earth has a magnetic field which is aligned north to south, and compass needles are attracted to the central north, or to the north in general. So much like upon the sphere, if you head west and keep your compass needle pointed to the right, you will eventually wind up where you started, although the same exact thing applies to the flat Earth. If you have a magnetic center and you travel to the left or west, keep your compass needle pointed to the right, then you're going to describe a circle upon a plane. It is that simple. It is certainly not exclusive to a sphere, and anyone who continues to claim that circumnavigation is somehow exclusive to a sphere needs to walk around their house. Walk around your neighborhood. Does that prove your house or your neighborhood is a sphere? No, it doesn't. Another one that really gets me is the whole argument about counter-rotation of cyclonic forces, either north or south of the equator, or so it's claimed. It does appear that the seasonal path of the sun from Capricorn to Cancer and back dictates the dividing line between counter-rotating cyclonic forces. And again, the claim that counter-rotating cyclonic forces are somehow exclusive to a sphere is ridiculous. Simply run a canoe oar through the river water, and if you get it just right, you'll notice that two cyclones, essentially, two eddies, essentially drift away from your oar, and they will be rotating in opposite directions. It's a basic fundamental property of fluid dynamics that when you agitate fluids in a certain manner, it will create these counter-rotational eddies on either wake, the wake on either side of the perturbing body into the water. So the notion that this phenomenon is somehow exclusive to the Earth being a sphere and proof of the Coriolis force upon the spinning ball Earth is absurd. And of course, the Coriolis force is granted for argument's sake by the Globbers when it comes to allegedly proving why cyclones rotate in opposite directions in either hemiplane. But the very same Coriolis force is completely ignored when it comes to observations like a westbound flight is sometimes identical in duration to its respective eastbound flight. So this is, this is granting the Coriolis effect carte blanche when it comes to something that, apparently or perceivedly favors a globe Earth, but ignoring the very same fundamental law of physics when it comes to something that completely debunks the notion of a spherical spinning Earth. Because, again, the Coriolis force basically dictates that if you are fixed to a rotational body, so if you're fixed to a rotating frame of reference, that rotating frame of reference can behave as a fixed frame of reference to some extent, so long as you are fixed and secured to that rotating primary body. The instant that you are released and even accelerated out and away from that rotational frame of reference, you, as the secondary body in this equation, absolutely do not retain your rotational frame of reference around the axis as you did when you were firmly secured to the rotating primary body. So an experiment anyone can do is put something of weight in your hand, spin around as fast as you can, maybe put something of equal weight in both hands, and then release and accelerate those objects as you are spinning around as fast as you can. If you expect those objects to continue spinning around you as they did when you had them in your hands, then you know nothing about life at all. I'm surprised you can even wake up and stand up in the mornings, because it is such common sense, obvious stuff that the airplanes in this example, when accelerating to the west after being released from the friction and rotating frame of reference as the Earth, a westbound airplane should be racing towards destinations that are racing towards the nose of the plane, and conversely, eastbound planes should be racing against destinations that are racing against the nose of the plane. And so, the fact that westbound flights are often, or at least once ever, identical in duration to its respective eastbound flight conclusively proves that the Earth is in fact stationary. But again, the Coriolis force dictates that such objects as airplanes or molecules of a hurricane are not going to remain fixed to the rotational frame of reference with the Earth, and it is just absurd how the Globbers can, observe the Coriolis force when it suits them and deny and ignore the Coriolis force when it does not. But it is pretty much the standard operating procedure when it comes to globetards. There's plenty of tangible physical evidence which debunks the notion of a ball Earth, and zero evidence to the contrary. I often mention the moon phases being an exact indicator of the moon's position relative to the Earth and the Sun, assuming the heliocentric ball Earth model. Yesterday, on the 18th of January 2019, I noticed the waxing gibbous moon in the early afternoon and recorded it about 4:30 p.m., many degrees over the horizon and before sunset. This simple observation is categorically impossible according to the ball Earth theory, as the moon should be opposite the sun, certainly not visible high in the sky hours before sunset, as the moon would necessarily be on the opposite side of the hypothetical ball, hundreds of thousands of miles underfoot from the observer on the day side of the hypothetical ball Earth. In reality, all of the so-called evidence that is presented to us as exclusive to the spherical Earth is indeed flimsy at best, falling blatantly short when it comes to any sort of verifiable evidence that is exclusive to a spinning ball. Were the Earth in fact a spinning sphere as they claim, traveling in multiple directions at once, along curvilinear paths no less, there would necessarily be measurable, obvious evidence for the inherent acceleration achieved by traveling along, a single curvilinear trajectory, not to mention multiple conflicting curvilinear trajectories. The entire standard model relies upon the notion that the spinning ball Earth is somehow a fixed frame of reference. According to this type of bass-ackwards anti-logic, the spinning ball Earth must necessarily be allowed to completely ignore and avoid many immutable laws of nature which cannot be avoided under any circumstances. Why is it that the spinning ball Earth gets a free pass when it comes to all logical scrutiny or skeptical criticism? The resounding answer to this question is the fact that everyone in the modern world has been convinced since adolescence to completely and unquestioningly believe in the absurd theory that the fixed and immovable plane, the only possible fixed frame of reference in reality, is somehow a spinning sphere. You need not worry yourself with jumping through theoretical hoops founded upon cockamamie assumptions in order to understand the self-evident fact that the world only presents itself to us as a stationary realm exhibiting exactly zero curvature, regardless of the distance being measured or observed. This is not some theory, nor is it an attempt to hypothesize at some grand conspiracy. These are simple, measurable facts, simple geometry, simple physics. And by the way, that is among the first arguments used by Globbers. Quote, "So you're saying that everyone is lying to us, everyone from our science teachers to the founders of NASA?" Of course, our science teachers were probably not lying to us, as they too were indoctrinated into the very same belief system as the rest of us. NASA, on the other hand, I would venture to wager that anyone who claims to have gone to space and orbited around the globe, or astronauts, are necessarily liars, although the majority of people working for NASA are probably completely innocent and have absolutely no idea that NASA is really a deceptive agency at its purpose, at its core, and the Earth is not a spinning ball. If you were to tell them this sort of information, they would probably laugh you out of the room, they wouldn't believe you, and they might even call a shrink. But, in terms of the science teachers, anyone with a degree in some physical science, as science teachers tend to do, they have necessarily undergone even more mind control programming into the many areas of science which blindly concur with the theory of a ball Earth. So theoretical sciences in general have been tainted by this absurd and cockamamie theory that has stolen the heart and mind of science. So yes, theoretical sciences are heartless and mindless. In fact, practically all fields of so-called science have been tainted with the pseudoscientific indoctrination into the globe Earth cult of the deceived. When one's entire worldview is poisoned from a very young age with propaganda involving concepts such as the globe Earth and, yes, Santa Claus, that are apparently absurd and equally unbelievable, were you to conduct an experiment, never mentioning the concept of a spinning ball Earth to a child until they were a grown and skeptical, well-educated adult, I'd wager that it would be pretty much impossible to convince such a person that they live upon a spinning sphere. It appears the concept of a ball Earth was, at some point, foisted upon an entire generation of toddlers and all future generations of toddlers to come. This is the only way such a preposterous lie could ever take root and find itself concreted into the minds of practically every man, woman, and child in the world. It is certainly not as if a rational adult human being would ever arrive at the conclusion that the clearly flat and stationary world is somehow spherical and spinning upon an axis, traveling in multiple directions at once. I submit that such a person would insist you were mistaken or mad, or were you to introduce the concept entailed with the standard ball Earth model after a lifetime of experience and observation without the mind control programming inflicted upon all of our children and grandchildren to come. Should we stand idly by while the majority of people remain entrenched in this insidious lie? I think not. I think we have a moral imperative to try and wake people up to this. The deception itself is, in a morbid sense, beautiful, if only for a cold appreciation of the intricacy and effectiveness of the deception itself. The indoctrination into the beliefs of scientism ensure that the subject be completely and totally blitzkrieged with overt as well as covert psychological tactics and indoctrination. From classic repetition of mantras entailing so-called facts to the ever-present benign miniature globe found in every classroom and most offices. Anyone who potentially criticizes or skeptically scrutinizes the standard model is shamed and corrected. As a result, the finished product of the indoctrination campaign will similarly scold and shun anyone questioning or, God forbid, disagreeing with the crazy notion of a spinning ball Earth. Furthermore, the deception is beautifully, if you will, self-reinforcing, in the sense that even if you explain the truth to a rational, well-educated person, if you explain to them that the world is not a spinning ball, they simply do not believe you, and they will deem you to be crazy. Were you to take them to the top of a mountain and show them, say, a mountain range which technically should not be visible, as it should be based miles below the horizon line, assuming a ball Earth, they will simply not concede the argument for a ball, even though this single observation completely slaughters any notion of a spheroid Earth. Most people, when confronted with the notion that the ball Earth is a lie, will fail to see any potential motive for such a far-out lie. What would some person or group of people have to gain in convincing the world of such a wild and absurd theory about the obviously flat and stationary Earth being a spinning ball in outer space, flying through infinity a zillion miles an hour in multiple directions at once? It seems that the controllers of this world glean benefit from our complete and utter bamboozlement about the very ground that we live on, and somehow they are able to ensnare society at large into this prescribed mindset when humans are led to believe the world, and by extension ourselves, are insignificant, expendable, and accidental in our genesis. It leads to malleability of spirit, it would seem. We're told that the world is nothing special, really, and there are billions and billions of other worlds flying around the cosmos too, many of which certainly host sentient, intelligent life forms, and are probably far more advanced in technology, as well as the theory of evolution, than we. All of this belittles humankind and our unique, unparalleled physical plane of reality and the special place that we hold as observers of God's creation. All ancient cultures, thus all ancient religions, tell tales of a flat and stationary, or at least non-rotating world. The theoretical science has thus systematically attacked and discredited all ancient cultures and religions by holding the position that the world is clearly a spinning ball, proving to the deceived and gullible masses that the ancient cultures of history and prehistory must have been ignorant fools, believing in a flat and motionless earth. Little did we know they were right all along. Those of us raised during our technologically advanced culture of the postmodern era are lucky enough to know the Earth is a spinning ball in outer space, even though in reality our world is the polar opposite of those things. According to our blanket indoctrination into anti-logic, the ancients seem to be very stupid, and we seem to be very lucky to be ignorantly blissful in our deception. By convincing us all that our world is insignificant in the grand scheme of things, and therefore we ourselves are by direct extension also insignificant, it places the individual into a state of mind that somehow primes and catalyzes us for further mind control programming via the educational and mass media systems, amongst others. Okay guys, thanks for joining for the video. I'm going to wrap this up, but I just wanted to let you know that this channel, as always, is viewer supported. As many of you know, I was out of commission for about a month during the holidays, and I'm coming up against everything coming due again, and I'm just not sure how I'm going to make it. So if you've ever considered supporting this channel, please consider becoming a patron member for as little as $1 per month at www.patreon.com/themorguile, or you can do a one-time contribution through PayPal to www.paypal.me/themorguile, and any amount that you can do is greatly appreciated. Again, it will help me to be able to dedicate more time towards doing videos as opposed to working like an Israeli slave for minimum wage. So thanks so much for watching. God bless you guys. And as always, spread the word, spread the world, and peace out, everybody.